Hello everyone, welcome back to Social Network Analysis and the Introduction to Deep Learning. So in the last few lectures, we saw the applications of deep learning. We saw the neurons that are basically the building blocks of deep learning architecture. We saw the perceptron. We saw feed-forward networks and how to learn the weights and biases of that network using the backpropagation algorithm. In today's lecture, we'll see two more architectures of the deep learning paradigm, that are basically the convolutional neural networks or the CNNs and the recurrent neural networks or the RNNs. So let us just get started. So first, we'll talk about convolutional neural networks. So in the last lecture, we saw something called feed-forward neural network, which basically constitutes different perceptrons in a hierarchical fashion, right? But in this structure, in this kind of architecture, the neighborhood information is not captured. That is, each data point, it is treated as an independent point in the space, which might be true for certain cases, but say, for example, in an image classification task, suppose we want to identify whether an image contains a dog or not. Then in order to do that, we must be aware, we can't look at each pixel as a separate data entity, since a patch of the pixel, a collection of a pixel will be constituting the dog in this example. So we want to look at a particular set of pixel or a particular neighborhood of a pixel in order to identify or in order to achieve a task of identifying whether there is a dog in the picture or not. Now this kind of task, this kind of neighborhood capturing, that is not possible in the traditional feed-forward neural network. But this kind of problem, it can be handled by something known as a convolutional neural network. So this convolutional neural network, it is able to capture the neighborhood information. We will see how this capturing happens. Now, another thing that is interesting to note here is that a traditional feed-forward network is not translation invariant. Now, what is translation invariant? It basically, say for instance, in the example we just said, that whether an image contains a dog or not. Now, an image, there can be like multiple images where in the first image, the dog is present in the bottom left corner of the image, right? And now it can happen that we flip the same image vertically, and now the dog is present in the bottom right corner of the image, right? Now for these two images, the output that we should get should be 1, since the dog is present in both of these images. However, if we use a normal feed-forward network, it might happen that the output for this and this image are different. Although the two images are completely same, but just the second image is the flipped version of the first image, but still it can happen that the output can be different. However, in the case of convolutional neural network, since we are using something known as kernels and filters over the image, it cannot happen that the output of such an instance is different. If the network is trained properly, then for both the images, the output should be true. That is, yes, the image does contain a dog. So that is why we say that convolutional neural network or CNNs, they are basically translation invariant. Now moving forward, let us first just see, just as the example we just said, that whether there is a dog in the image. So here is a very similar example, that suppose we humans, we want to identify whether there is a flower in this image or not. In order to do that, what we'll do is that we'll basically look at different segments of the images of this image, right? And we try to identify whether there is a flower in each of these segments or not. And if there is a flower in any one of the segment, then we say that yes, there is actually a flower present in this image. So we want to mimic this similar or same behavior in a neural network, correct? Now, how to do that? Now, for each of the segment that we have, we want to apply some kind of filter over it. That is, some kind of transformation over it, so that we can know that based on the output of this transformation, or based on the output of this filtered value that we have, whether this output represents the pattern of a flower or not. So basically, for each of the different segments that we have divided our figure into, the image into, we apply a kind of filter over it, right? We apply a kind of transformation over this segment. So for example, the first segment here, we see this segment, we apply this filter over it, that is, we multiply the values, the pixel values in this segment with say some real values, a matrix of a real value, and which the matrix which basically, let's say, identify the flower on a higher level. So we'll go into the depth of this right now, but yeah, so basically if it identifies the matrix is made in such a way that identifies the flower, where the presence of a flower in the image, then we want to multiply this matrix over all these segments of the images. For example, this first segment here, we multiply the matrix here and obtain some value here, and check whether this particular matrix represents a pattern of a flower or not. Then again, we have the second value here. We take this segment and we use these values, we calculate, we have this filter over this particular segment, we multiply it, and we see that the resultant matrix that we get represents the pattern of a flower or not. Then again, we have another segment here, where we take this segment here, we multiply it with some weights, some filters, and check whether the resultant values represents the pattern of a flower or not. Finally, we have another here, where we multiply with some values, we have the filter, and we check whether there is a flower or not. Now, if any of these values are yes, then we can say that yes, there is a flower in the image. Now, and how to do this? So now this NNs here, they are not like the feed-forward network. So we are talking about filters and transformations. So if we are talking about that, then it is necessary that we talk about convolutional neural network, since these NNs here, these neural networks here, these are basically convolutional neural network. So a convolutional neural network, or a CNN, it is basically used for image processing tasks like classification, segmentation, and so on. And this kind of a neural network, it works on a 2D kind of an input, and this network is made up of convolution layers. Now, what is a convolution layer? Now, basically a convolution layer is when you slide a kernel over the input. So a kernel is basically a 2D matrix which acts as a filter in order to identify the different patterns in the image, right? So for example, suppose we have a grayscale image with some kind of values of the grayscale pixel, right? So we have a matrix here where, let's say that if we have some values here, let's say that if the background is gray, we are getting a value of say 0. If it is white, we are getting a value of -1, and if it is black, we are getting a value of 1. Then we have some values here, 1 1 0 0 -1 1 and 1 0 0 0 and so on. And what we do is we create a kernel or a filter of size 3 cross 3. Now this image we saw, it is of size 4, 5, 6. It is of size 6 cross 5. And what we do is we create a filter of 3 cross 3 here, such that it identifies edges. So we have 1, 1, 1 in here. We say that we want to identify such pixels in our original image, such that the right and the left side of that pixel is basically white, and okay, so for suppose 0 represents white and -1 represents gray and 1 represents black, right? So the right and left is basically white, and in the middle we have the black pixels. So this kind of filter might help us identify the edges in the figure, right? So if we are to multiply this kind of filter over here, so we have 1, 1, 1, 1 and 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 here, right? So now what we'll do is we'll take this filter, and suppose we put this filter over this part here and we multiply. So now we do point-wise multiplication. So now we'll have the output as 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0 and 0, 0, 0, right? Now based on this output, we'll be getting, we'll slide this filter one at a time over here. So for this second part, if we are to put this filter over this part, then for this part the output will be something like 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, correct? Now similarly, we'll have some values for, like, if we slide the filter one more to the right, we'll have like this part to consider, and then we'll slide the filter one to the bottom, to like one step down, then we'll have this part to consider, right? Then again to the right, again to the right, and then again to the bottom of it, right? So we'll have some values for each of these filter mappings that we have, correct? Now we can perform something known as pooling in order to get one single value out of this filtered value. So here, suppose we are doing just max pooling, that is we are trying to find out the maximum value of the resultant output. So we have here 1, and or say in order to find the edges, I think it would be better to do like summation kind of pooling. So here the output is 1, that is we are just summing all of these, and here it is 3, that is we are summing all of these. So we can say that, yeah, the higher the value, the denser the region is, that is the more edges it represents, that is more there are more ones in the middle column, right? So basically in our convolutional neural networks, we are trying to do this only. We are trying to create some kernels or some filters that we slide over the image in such a way so that different patterns are being identified and captured from different regions of the image. So for instance, as we talked about the translation invariant things, even if the dog is present at the bottom left or the bottom right corner, whenever the filter that is constructed to identify a dog is passing over these pixel values, it will be giving us the same value even if the dog is present on the left or on the right? So yeah, so this is how convolution network work, with the help of these filters in order to identify different patterns. So we cannot like in the case as we saw in the feed-forward neural network case, we cannot have a filter, or we cannot have a single perceptron in the case of feed-forward, and in the case of convolution network, we cannot have a single filter which is able to identify complex objects like dog or flowers in this case. So since the flower can be of multiple types, it can be of different types. So all of these figures, they contain flowers, but each of the flowers, there are of different kinds. It can be roses, it can be a sunflower, it can be a daisy. So we must identify some basic patterns of a flower instead of identifying like complete flower in the image. So what we might do, what we might want is to have multiple filters or multiple kernels passing over the image so that different attributes of the image is being captured. For example, here we have multiple kernels to identify different patterns. Here we have like maybe one kernel is used to identify petals in the image, one kernel is used to identify the sepals in the image, and another is used to identify the leaves. And when we have these multiple kernels here, multiple convolution layers, we'll have multiple representations from the single input image, which helps us to identify the different patterns in the image, and finally these patterns will be used to identify whether the image contains the desired object or not, if it is an object classification task, right? Now, how does, as we already saw, but like let's just see again, how does this convolution works? So suppose this blue matrix, it represents the image, the different pixels of an image, the different values of the pixel of an image. So we have here like a 5x5 image, and this green represents the filter. So we have a 3x3 filter here, which we are applying over this image. Now, suppose when we do a pointwise multiplication of this filter with the image, we are the result is this table, right? This matrix that we have. So now what we want to do is, in order to get a single value out of this feature map, basically this resultant matrix from the filter, we can perform pooling. So we can either perform max pooling, min pooling, average pooling, sum pooling. So here we just perform max pooling and just capture the maximum value that we have in the matrix, which is 5 in our case. So this particular value will give us the value 5, and this value 5 will be a part of our final feature map that is here, right? So this is like the result that we are getting after passing the filter over the whole image. So we put the value 5 here, then we move forward, we slide this filter over the one step to the right so that we can identify a similar pattern over this part of the image, if the pattern is there or not. We again do pointwise multiplication, perform pooling, and get the output and place it in the feature map at the appropriate position. So this second position is also filled now, which is basically the values that we get from this part of the image, the green highlighted part of the image. Moving further, we move this filter again to the right and try to identify the pattern, whether it is present in this part of the image or not, and again do pooling and fill our filter map, and so on happens for the complete image, right? So if we move further, then this filter will move to this part, right? This part, and then this part will be will capture this part of the feature map. Then the filter will move to further right, and it will move on to this part, which will capture this part of the filter map. Then again it will move on to one step down, it will come to this part, which will capture this part of the feature map, and so on. So all of this feature map will be filled with the filtered value of the filters that we pass on the image, right? So this is basically how, on a theoretical and intuitive level, the convolutional neural network works. That is, we are given the input as a 2D, we are given a 2D input, which can be an image, and we have some filters or some kernels which identify different patterns in the input, and based on these patterns, it generates a feature map of the input, and this feature map can then be further used to get more we can apply different kernels or different filters over these feature maps, or we can also just pass this feature map to a feed forward layer in order to perform our downstream tasks, say object classification. Now we are talking about like higher level object identification, for example like flowers, but as mentioned, different feature map can learn different things. For example, in this, like if you want to identify where is the hand of the robot, it can learn different things like edges, and one feature map can maybe these feature map are learning where are the gray edges, where are the brown edges, and so on. And the next feature map are basically trying to understand where are the fingers, if there is an arm near it, and so on. And then higher, based on the higher level of patterns that we are trying to identify, the higher layers of the network will be able to identify such patterns, right? So yeah, so this was for the convolutional neural network. It was a very brief overview, very broad overview of the structure of the architecture. And in order to understand the maths and the nitty-gritties behind it, then you must go over some of the very interesting blogs and research papers that are present in this domain, right? So now, while convolutional neural networks are, they have proven effective for, say, image manipulation tasks, what happens if we are to, like, if the given input is basically a sequential input, that is the input at a time step t depends upon the input at time step t minus 1 or time step t minus 2, then this convolution neural network might not prove beneficial, since it captures the local neighborhood of the input. That is, if we are to provide a filter of size 3 cross 3, then the convolutional layer will just capture the neighborhood of the dimension 3 cross 3 and not the global neighborhood of the whole input, right? And moreover, the input length that the CNN require is of fixed size, since the convolution filter and the input, it should be of like a matching size, so that the filter can be applied to the whole input, right? So now what we want to do is that we want to do two things. Actually, we want to do three things. First is that we want to handle sequential input. That is, we want to capture the time dependency between the inputs. Secondly, we want to capture the global context or the global neighborhood of a particular input, and we want to handle an input which might not be of fixed length, which can be of different lengths. In order to do that, we will see something known as recurrent neural networks. So basically, a recurrent neural network, or RNN, these kind of networks, they are used for sequential data. They have a concept of something called as memory. That is, they are able to remember what kind of inputs they have seen, and then use that information in order to get the output for the next input, right? So they have the concept of something called as memory. These inputs, these networks, they can handle inputs of varying length, since I'll get to it why it can handle. And the learning that happens in these architecture, it is based on an algorithm known as backpropagation through time. So backpropagation we already know, and since it is a sequential data, the transformation in this kind of data is happening over time. So here the algorithm is something known as backpropagation through time, but we'll not go into the depth of this algorithm, and I'll leave it to you guys to go and study this algorithm in detail. But in this lecture, we'll just have an overview of how the RNN works. So RNN can be thought of like a simple feed-forward network, but it has a feedback loop. That is, if we just look at this left hand side of this particular slide, we have this input xt, which is being processed by this unit A, which calculates which processes the input and calculates the hidden states and the activation functions over it, just as we did in the feed-forward network. And then the output of this layer is being again passed on to the same layer, and we also have something called as hidden state. We'll see. So this whole network, it can be unfolded in this fashion, as can be seen at the right hand side. So it is easier to understand if we unfold this architecture. So suppose at timestamp 0, we are passing the input x0 to this whole architecture, and this input x0, it is being processed by this unit A, and whatever information it is learning at this time step, it is being captured in the hidden state h0, which can be passed on as an output, as well as it is passed on to the next timestamp where the input x1 of the one timestamp comes into play. Then this input is again passed on to the same unit A, that is, the weights here of all these A are same because it is the same unit. It is just an unfolded way so that we can better understand it, but the unit A is the same. So here this x1 is passed on this unit A, and it also has some information from the previous timestamp, that is x0. We have this h0 here as well. So based on these two information that this A is getting, some modification will take place here, some processing will take place here, and it will result in the h1, which can be directly considered as one of the outputs, or can be passed on as a hidden state to the next timestamp, right? This is how this whole RNN network looks like. But you might be wondering what these inputs and outputs can be, right? So sequential data, the best example of sequential data is basically it is basically like a text, right? So for text, if we are to read a text, so for example, if we are to read this last line, that is learning back propagation through time. So now when we are on the word time here, we must not consider this word as standalone or independent. We must consider these three words that are preceding this word time, so that we can understand that what is the context the word time is present in order to understand the whole concept of the statement, right? So this kind of sequential data, where a particular word at a particular timestamp depends on the previous words on the previous timestamps, or the previous, like a particular input for a particular timestamp depends on the previous timestamp inputs, this kind of data is handled by recurrent neural networks. So now this neural network, this RNN, can be of different types based on the number of inputs and outputs that we have. So for example, the first one can be one-to-one. That is, it is basically normal feed-forward network. We have one input and we want to produce a single output. So for example, we have like an image classification task. We are given an image, or not an image classification task, but a single data point classification task. So we are given a data point and we have to identify whether it's a positive data point or negative data point. Then we can use simple feed-forward network, which is basically a one-to-one RNN. Then we have one-to-many RNN. That is, the input is a single object, but we are to generate an output with multiple elements. For example, a task can be of image captioning. So an image is our single input, but we want to generate a caption such that the word that is present at t1 time step depends on the word that is being generated at the t0th time step, right? So in order for the caption to be coherent, each word at the tth timestamp that is being generated must be aware of all the words that are already being generated from the t0 to t-1th timestamp. Correct? So in such a scenario, we can use a one-to-many kind of a structure. Moving forward, we also have a many-to-one kind of a structure, which can be used, for instance, for an emotion classification type of for a task. That is, we have like suppose we are given a text or a tweet, and we want to classify this tweet into into one of the emotion. So we are given a tweet as a sequence of words, and we want to we pass these tweet into, say, this RNN, and we are given a single output here where we just identify the label of the emotion that is present in the tweet. So this kind of a structure where the input contains multiple words in a sequence and we are to get just one output, this is known as a many-to-one structure. Then we have a many-to-many structure, which where the input can be multiple words if we are considering text, and the output can also be multiple words. So the one such instance can be machine translation, where we have multiple words, like multiple English words maybe as the input and multiple Hindi words as the output, right? Then we can also have POS tagging, NER tagging, and any many-to-many kind of an paradigm that can be such a network or many-to-many kind of RNN can be used in these type of problem statements. Now, although we'll not go into the detail of the different type of architectures of this RNN, but we have some specialized architecture for RNN where called as LSTM or GRU, where so LSTM is short for long short memory, and here what we have is that we have multiple gates where a new information is being learned or stored, and maybe the another kind of information, that like the useless information, it is being forgotten, and new essential information is being added to our knowledge base, and then it is performing some kind of processing based on these different gates. Similarly, we have this GRU, that is the gate recurrent unit, and we have another set of gates which perform in a different set of manner, and these LSTMs and GRUs, they are basically some different type of architectures of recurrent neural networks which can be applied to different application based on the type of output and the input that we have, right? Now we come to something known as attention. Now we saw that in RNNs or in recurrent neural network, we want to capture context, right? But here the context is, although the context is being captured, but it is not being captured efficiently, or we can say that all of the context that is present in our network is being given equal importance. But it might happen that some part of the context is more important than some other part. For instance, if we look at this statement, these two statements, that the first statement is the animal didn't cross the road because it was too tired, versus the other statement is the animal didn't cross the street because it was flooded. So we see that in the first statement, since the last two words are too tired, we know that this particular word it refers to the animal, since the animal can be tired, not the road. Whereas if we see the next statement, then the word flooded is there in the statement. So this word it corresponds to the word street and not animal here, because animal cannot be flooded and street is flooded. But if we are to use a normal RNN without any kind of attention or any kind of weight over it, then each of the words present in the context, that is animal, cross, street, will be given equal importance in order to, when we are trying to get the representation of the word it. But we want weight of the importance to be in such a way that animal is given more importance in the first instance and street is given more importance in the second instance. So this is basically captured by this concept called attention. So basically in the first case, where the statement is the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired, we know that here, since it is too tired here, then the it refers to animal more, right? This it refers to animals. So computationally, we can capture this by giving more weight to the term animal and less weight to the rest of the words, right? So this weighting is actually done by the attention mechanism that we have. So, and in the second scenario, the animal didn't cross the street because it was flooded. We know since we have flooded here, then it, the word it should refer more to the word street here, right? So, this kind of weighting, it is done by this module of attention that we have. So again, not going into the mathematics of it, just the intuition behind it. So basically, attention is something that is used to give weights to our context, that is how much attention we want to give to the different words that are present in the context. So how can we use this attention mechanism? So suppose we have a many-to-one architecture, let's say a sentiment classifier where we are given a tweet as the input and we want to classify the sentiment of it, right? Whether it is positive or negative. Now, instead of just performing a normal RNN architecture that is shown in this figure, we can actually have an attention block in between. That is, we pass our input to an RNN and we get some outputs from this RNN, and these outputs are then passed on to this attention block so that we can identify how much weight do we have to give to each output in order to determine the sentiment class for the input, right? So for instance, if the input is I love food, now here in order to determine the sentiment of the statement, which we humans can immediately tell that it is a positive sentiment since it contains the word love. Now for the computer to understand this, the attention mechanism, what it will do is that it will give more weightage to the term love here, and based on this more weightage here, it can identify the polarity of the sentence more efficiently, right? It can identify that if it is a positive tweet because it contains the word love. So we saw in all this different lectures over deep learning, we got introduced to deep learning as a paradigm. Then we saw the perceptron and how we can use it in a multi-layer perceptron fashion in a feed-forward network. We saw the backpropagation algorithm, which is actually used to learn the different weights and biases of the feed-forward network. Then we saw the convolutional neural network, which is basically used in in a 2D kind of an input task, like images and all. Then we saw RNNs, which are used for sequential tasks. And lastly, we got acquainted ourselves by the concept of attention, which basically captures the different weights that we are to give to the input in order to capture the context in a completely efficient manner. So these are some various references that you must see. So these are just the blogs. Apart from these blogs, one must also go through all the research papers that introduce these concepts the first time, and then if you want to learn more about these concepts in a simpler or a overview kind of manner, then one can look at these blogs, which are actually used to create these slides. So that was all for the deep learning introduction of this social network analysis class. Thank you.